Right now, as you listen to this, tens of thousands of computer chips are burning through electricity at a rate that would power entire cities. They're training artificial intelligence models, processing queries, generating images and videos. The energy they consume in a single day could power Thailand for a year. That demand for energy is only getting bigger. Tech giants are building their own power plants, and geopolitical rivalries are heating up as we enter a new kind of arms race, not for weapons or territory, but for the electricity that powers artificial intelligence. So on this episode of Reuters Econ World, we're looking at AI and the race to power it. I'm your host, Kim Vinnell, in Whanganui, New Zealand. All right, now I know you're used to hearing Carmel Crimmins as the host of this show, but she is off on holidays. So I've got my finger on the control switch, so to speak, this week. I'm the host of our sister show, Reuters World News, but I am loving this opportunity to dive in on the issue du jour and maybe even the issue of the century, the battle to power the AI revolution. It is a lot to unpack, so without further ado, let me introduce to you the very best people for the job. Jeffrey Dastin is in San Francisco and is Reuters technology correspondent. Laila Kearney is in New York and is Reuters US energy correspondent. And Colleen Howe is in Beijing and is Reuters China coal, gas and power correspondent. Jeff, Laila, Colleen, thanks so much for joining me on Reuters Econ World.
Great to be here.
Thanks. Oh, thanks for having us.
I want to start with something a little personal. How much are you all actually using AI in your everyday lives?
I mean, I use it for work. I found it to be really good for translation, especially like Chinese English, and for planning my vacation.
I've used ChatGPT, kind of just testing it out, but I'm not like super into technology. I think I just kind of gravitate towards like I report on the electricity side, which is like wires and power plants, and that just sort of resonates with me more.
Analog life, analog stuff. What about you, Jeffrey? I mean, you're a tech reporter. Surely it's like ChatGPT or whoever you choose is like your sidekick.
Well, I guess I have to be a San Francisco stereotype because I do in fact use it all the time now. And the question is, why spend all your time Googling something yourself when you can have Google's Gemini or ChatGPT do all that quote unquote deep research for you? So I find it very useful and also want to second how relevant it is for translation.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of this conversation. What is powering this AI we, or mostly all of us, are using? How is the energy needed to build AI changing the game? Jeffrey?
It's not the first time that AI companies have cared about energy or worried about it for how they're going to build and deploy their products, but it certainly is a step change from before ChatGPT. So if you went to tech conferences or talk to people about energy, it would be the question of sustainability. How do we make sure that we are having renewable energy or have a 100% renewable energy run operation? Or it would be a question of efficiency. How do we have the most efficient cooling? How do we not waste energy and waste precious investor dollars in our data centers? But after ChatGPT, and particularly as AI systems scaled up and became more powerful, it's been less a question of efficiency or sustainability or similar concerns and more a question of capacity.
So who are the big players here?
The companies that are huge players right now on the tech side would be Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, all these companies that are referred to, the jargon as hyperscalers, because they can help you scale up your website or your business really quickly. They have quickly found themselves in the business of building out and procuring energy via data centers for any AI developer. So they are the ones that get together the chips from NVIDIA and they get the power supply from a utility company and they go to these AI developers and say, you can pre-train, as the jargon goes, your AI model, do all these quote unquote training runs, and you can use gazillions. I'm not going to have the precise unit of metric here, but you use a lot of energy to do that. And then you can also do that when you're running your AI model and you're serving it to customers. And so these data center suppliers, if you will, these cloud companies are the major players here on the tech side.
Google is sort of an interesting example because they are getting involved in PJM, which is the largest US electric grid. They're actually Google is partnered with PJM. There's nothing that I've seen quite like this before. Google's also doing some things along the lines of striking power purchase agreements to revamp hydro facilities, advanced geothermal. So they've got a lot going on there. But I think that when I've been to energy conferences where now the big tech people are talking, they're still saying they don't want to get into the business of owning power plants. They're not necessarily wanting to take on that risk.
We'll get to what they are taking on, which is still a sizable shift in a little bit. But first, you mentioned data centers, Jeff, which are powering the current and the next generation of AI. What do they actually look like?
It's essentially racks and racks and racks of computer servers all lined up and optimized to not take up too much power, not to overheat to the extent possible. And that means no windows. That means other certain features to maximize the efficiency of the space. But it's just imagine kind of endless computers all humming at the same time.
Basically, yeah, big kind of anonymous looking buildings with, like Jeffrey said, a bunch of servers inside. The work that the servers are doing is so intense, it's creating a lot of heat, and the heat has to be whisked away. Now, pretty much all of the data centers are being built with liquid cooling systems, and those take up a lot of electricity themselves, just the cooling systems. Actually, the cooling, the computing, those are the two big energy guzzling factors of the data centers.
One of the most dramatic energy moves comes from Microsoft, and it involves a name you might recognize. 3 Mile Island is one of the most well-known names in American nuclear history. In 1979, one of its reactors suffered a partial meltdown, the worst nuclear accident the US has ever seen. That reactor was shut down permanently, but another on the same site continued operating until 2019. Now, Microsoft says, at least, it's going to bring it back to power AI.
The idea of 3 Mile Island is that there aren't only so many sites with massive energy potential, clean energy potential that you can restart in the US. It would be way more expensive to start from scratch. So even if the on its face price tag of what Microsoft is doing, billions of dollars ultimately, is very, very large. And in the scheme of what its business needs and how existential it's now framing predictable energy sources to be, it makes sense that it's going to even this kind of, I don't want to say infamous place, but a place where there's a lot of history because it's the best option it has, or a sooner option it has to get that energy it needs.
There's another nuclear reactor in Michigan that is in the process of being restarted, but it hasn't restarted yet. And so there's no real precedent for this. So this reactor on 3 Mile Island is being resurrected under a new name, Crane Clean Energy Center. And if it actually does restart, and if it does so before the Michigan plant, it'll be the first time a nuclear reactor's been brought back to life.
So how big a role will nuclear play in all this?
I would say that generally all of the AI developers are excited about the possibility of nuclear energy, both because it's clean, but really because it just offers the potential for way more energy than the grid currently supplies.
And also it's untested, like the restarted big nuclear reactors. The advanced nuclear reactors are small by comparison. So, and those are largely untested technologies that will take a while to build. But if I could just add something on another reason for the 3 Mile Island restart, there's more pressure on these big technology companies to bring power to the grid and not just take from it. So for Microsoft to be able to say we entered into a 20-year power purchase agreement with Constellation Energy, which is the energy company that owns that nuclear reactor, and that is going to feed our data centers. It can say that we are bringing 800 plus megawatts of power to the grid, and we're not just taking from it. And so it's important to make a show of being kind of a good citizen in some respects by adding a little bit to the grid and not just taking from it.
Okay, it's time now for a quiz. According to Google's own data, how much energy does the average search using Gemini AI use when equated to TV time? And by that, I mean the energy used by a television when it's turned on. Is it the same as watching A, 2 seconds of TV, B, 9 seconds, C, 30 seconds, or D, an hour? I know you could ChatGPT that, but let's keep it old school. Stay with us, and we'll have the answer at the end of the episode. This shift isn't just about tech, it's about geopolitics. Countries are spending billions to secure energy dominance. And in this new arms race, the battleground isn't land or weapons, it's electricity. Jeffrey, is that overstating it?
With the idea that technology for years, for you could say decades or centuries, has been a major, if not the major contributor to economic growth and to power that any nation has, it's clear that artificial intelligence as the new frontier, as the most hopeful, sometimes some would say scary technology, that is going to be a major chip in this geopolitical battlefield.
The US and China have traditionally, of course, been the two big rival powers. If we take a look at them from this lens, Colleen, you're in China. How is Beijing gearing up?
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting because I feel like the discussion in China has been quite a bit different. I don't think that there's much concern around sort of power shortages and how to meet the, growing power supply demands. So they've said they want to be kind of like a leader in artificial intelligence globally by 2030. They also had a plan. It was called like Eastern Data, Western Computing. So basically, this kind of kicked off like a big round of data center building a couple years ago. So it's almost getting into like a state of overcapacity right now. So there's been a lot of talk like globally about overcapacity in China in solar and different industries. They're just producing like kind of more than they can buy, more than the world can kind of absorb. And now like data centers are moving into the overcapacity territory as well.
How has China managed to be so fast off the block? It seems like Beijing is really well positioned for whatever advancements AI is going to bring.
China is in a situation where they're seeing consumption has already been growing at about 5 to 6% per year, and that's off a pretty big base already. So they're just building a lot of capacity already. I think just to put it in kind of perspective, I think looking at the numbers, they built probably more wind and solar kind of capacity in the first half of this year than like what the US has basically ever constructed. I think it was like, if I'm not wrong, 300 gigawatts in the US, and then China had added a little bit more than that for the first half of this year. And there is some front loading because of a policy change, but basically they have the sort of capability to just add like massive amounts of power to the grid. And I think the permitting and the construction, all of that does tend to be faster here as well. And then on that, they're also not really sort of having any large scale like closures of coal power plants. For example, they've kind of put some of them on standby with the idea that they would have that capacity available in case it's needed. And they also they call it capacity payments to some coal power plants so that they can sort of have it online, even if it's not really like generating a lot.
So coal remains the majority.
Yeah, so the majority is still coming from coal. That percentage has been declining over time. And the focus going forward, there's so much wind and solar capacity now. The focus is on kind of like increasing that wind and solar generation to make up a bigger portion. But it's still majority from the coal-fired power plants and then a little bit of natural gas, but not as much as in some other countries.
Laila, how about in the US? Has it been forward-thinking in terms of AI needs? Is it prepared?
Well, the US has been on somewhat flat growth electricity-wise for almost 2 decades. And right now, sort of all of a sudden, over the last 2 years, or even less than that, there are data centers that are being proposed or built at 1,000 megawatts, 2,000 megawatts.
Can you give me a sense of what that is in real terms? Like, does that power like a small town or a...
Yeah, 1 gigawatt, which is 1,000 megawatts, could power about 850,000 homes. It could power, I think I've said before about all of the homes in the city of Philadelphia, which is like the 6th biggest city in the US. These are homes, not all industry and stuff.
Yeah. So that's a lot of power.
So it's a lot of power. And okay, so just as an anecdote, I used to cover oil for Reuters. I covered it for several years. And then I decided to switch over to power about 2.5 years ago. And I just started covering the power markets. I did like an initial round of earnings calls. There was really no mention of data centers anywhere except for in the by Dominion, which is the utility that covers Data Center Alley in Northern Virginia. And then I went on maternity leave. And when I got back, after 8 months or so of being away, I listened to my first round of utility earnings calls, and every single utility was talking about data center demand. The timeline was kind of like late 2023. The hyperscalers, the big technology companies, started having meetings with power companies, trying to get a sense of how much electricity they could get their hands on and how much of it could be all renewables, so wind and solar primarily. But kind of back to your question, it's still sort of very unanswered. Like, it's not clear by the utilities how real the demand is and where. They know there's a ton of demand from the data center side of things. They just don't know exactly where. So they don't really know necessarily until there's kind of shovels in the ground and those power purchase agreements have been struck and they have those contracts in place where that power consumption will be.
Yeah, I know you've covered a lot on Data Center Alley, right, Laila, which you mentioned. It's that legacy data center hub built in the early days of the internet, which is huge now, powering cloud computing and AI. But then there's also like loads of other work being done. Donald Trump, in July, it was announced billions of dollars, he said, was going into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to make it a data center hub. What did you make of that announcement, Laila?
It seems like President Trump is kind of going back to where he was in his first term in terms of supporting fossil fuel industries. So initially in his first term, it was oil, and now it's very much about natural gas and coal. He can do that in terms of regulations and executive orders. A lot of what seemed to happen at the Pittsburgh summit, though, was there were announcements. Some of them had already been made, and they were sort of re-announced. Some of them were sort of new, but like kind of loose in terms of, well, we're announcing these investments in building data centers in Pennsylvania, but there weren't specifics as to like when or with who or anything else. So there was a lot of talk. There's sort of brokering that seems to be happening, and there's a lot that there's some things that can be done anyway through executive orders and through regulations to sort of back natural gas, say, developments versus solar.
Just in the last week, Reuters has been reporting on the Trump administration's plans to make about 20 metric tons of Cold War-era plutonium from dismantled nuclear warheads available to US power companies as a potential fuel for reactors, according to a source and a draft memo outlining the plans. If you want to get across stories like that, make sure you sign up to Reuters' twice-weekly newsletter called Power Up. which covers everything about the global energy industry. I'll put a link to sign up to that in the description to this week's episode. All the infrastructure we've talked about obviously comes at a cost. And as we've discussed, the demand for electricity in the age of AI is about to go up big time. So who is going to pay? Laila?
Yeah, that's one of the big concerns and questions right now. And certainly the way that utility structures are now in a lot of cases, that those costs would be passed down to everyday homes and businesses. There's certain deals that are being struck that put more of the financial responsibility on the technology or the data center side of things. But all of that is kind of still being hashed out, thought out, and there are still big question marks around it.
What about in China, Colleen?
I want to say that I feel like this is another question that hasn't really come up in the discussion in China. But power prices here are also, I think, significantly lower than in the US, for example, which is one of the reasons like manufacturing in China is so competitive. There is a lot of infrastructure build out. Those costs, I think, are a lot of it is borne by the grid companies, which are state-owned companies. So the finances are a bit more not as transparent.
So where is this AI revolution headed? Jeffrey, can you sort of broad stroke it for us?
All of the major AI developers are chasing this holy grail that is either called general artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence. It's the idea that AI, rather than doing something narrow like a self-driving car, which obviously is impressive to most, if not every person who's been in one, they want AI that can do far more, that can take any range of tasks and handle them flawlessly or close to flawlessly like a human. And so while it is the case that a lot of what's happened and all the progress so far has basically been in the digital realm, some in AI have this view that to get to true general intelligence, you need to incorporate physical, real world data. So we're seeing some top researchers and top labs looking at how to create these quote unquote world models where they not only train AI on all the text that exists on the internet, but how do you bring in the physical world as a necessary component of intelligence? And as I'm guessing we're all asking here, that lends to this question of, are we going to have physical humanoid robots in our future?
Are we?
I would say that, thank you for asking. I would say that it's not immediately clear. There's clearly a ton of promise and hope around these robots that look kind of like a human form factor. And certainly we're seeing Tesla aiming to produce hundreds, thousands of these robots and put them into their factories and so forth. And there's obviously this science fiction hope that, and there are companies already working on this to train robots to go into your home so they can fold your laundry or help you around the house.
That's what I want. How far away is that?
Of course.
That's my real question.
Well, the reality is just like we haven't gotten to general intelligence yet, there isn't yet a flawless world model that is going to give you a perfectly dexterous robot in your home or in your factory. It's the exactly how to get there. There are lots of cool demos. There are lots of companies working on this, but we are still very far from this form factor being everywhere, which for those who've seen Terminator might be a temporary sign of relief.
I couldn't believe it the other day because I always have ChatGPT on talking mode. So I just, press a button and talk to it. My son picked up my phone and started talking into it like I do to ChatGPT. I was shocked, because normally you'd expect them to pick it up and kind of swipe and because it's interactive. And he started like babbling. It was incredible, but also a little bit frightening.
We see actually this desire, at least we see this a little bit with this Sam Altman, Johnny Ive, Project Johnny Ive being one of the architects, designers of the iPhone, this desire to create a new hardware form factor to match AI. So Meta has these glasses that let you talk to Meta's AI assistant, and Google is working on something. They're reviving an idea that they had years before, but now the tech is much better. And again, Sam Altman and Johnny Ive are working on some device, it seems, for the AI era. There aren't any public details known about this other than the fact that they're working on it. So it's possible that swiping is going to be something that us old timers do, and all the AI native children and so forth will just be talking to their technology.
Regardless of how soon robots are in the streets and in our homes, the more powerful AI becomes, the question of who powers it could redefine global leadership. Because powering AI isn't just about keeping servers online, it's about securing national advantage. And as countries invest accordingly, power dynamics are changing. Laila, could this even impact our existing sort of structures?
So yes, definitely the US power industry is changing, and the huge, biggest demand source being these AI data centers is new. It's changing the way the grid looks and functions, where these huge power demand sources are located are changing, with the ability to have data centers, for instance, that are in AI training mode be sort of in far-flung areas that they could have never been before, in rural areas that are not necessarily right next to big metropolitan areas, which is where the data centers have typically been clustered. And just with the sort of increasing flexibility of the grid, there's a lot that's kind of poised to change, with both the direction that the US electricity industry and grid was already sort of moving, and now it's being really sort of amplified and sped up and sort of complicated by these huge power needs by AI.
A future in which energy dominance determines technological dominance is certainly something that at least some top providers of energy are pushing as an idea. At the same time, there clearly are lots of other complicating factors that determine whether one nation will be ahead of another. So it's a big recipe. It's power, it's talent, it's political will, and lots of other things I'm sure I'm failing to mention.
A huge thank you to our contributors for today, Jeffrey Dastin, Laila Kearney, and Colleen Howe. You can get to their work on Reuters.com and the Reuters app. And as for our quiz, we asked that, according to Google's own data, how much energy does the average search using Gemini AI use when equated to TV time? Is it the same as watching A, 2 seconds of TV time, B, 9 seconds, C, 30 seconds, or D, an hour? The answer, according to Google, is that one search uses 0.24 watt hours. That's equivalent to watching about B, 9 seconds of TV. This is Reuters Econ World. Every week, we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. If you want to tell us what you thought of this week's show, please drop us a line in the comments section of your favorite podcast platform. You can also reach out to me or Carmel Crimmins, who's away, on LinkedIn. Sound design, music composition, and engineering on this episode was by Josh Sommer. Our podcast team includes Carmel Crimmins, Tara Oakes, Gail Isser, Chris Walljasper, Jonah Green, David Spencer, Bill Kasula-Barin, and Sharon Reich-Garson. Our executive producer is Laila de Kretser. And if you like longer format podcasts, be sure to check out our newly launched On Assignment podcast, where we go behind the scenes with our correspondents on the front lines and break down the world's biggest news stories. And of course, for all your daily news, join me on our weekday show, now 7 days a week, on Reuters World News Podcast. You can also ask your home smart speaker to play the latest news from Reuters. And you can catch all of our podcasts on the Reuters app or wherever you get your podcasts.